Okay, welcome everyone to the Astronomical Society of Edinburgh. I hope you're safe and well wherever you are in this stormy weather. We're getting battered here in Scotland. I know you are in other parts of the UK and Europe as well. And if you're on the other side of the Atlantic, I don't think we can blame you for this one. I think we developed this storm ourselves in the Bay of Biscay, but normally you do send your storms over to us, but not this time. This is what we've got coming up tonight. I've just got a few slides first from me. You might have seen that we're coming up to 100 years old next year, and we're actually 99 years old as of Sunday. So a little bit of information about what we're planning to do. A few news items, what we've got coming up over the next few months, and then the main event of the night is Mary McIntyre telling us about history of women in astronomy, the first part of that. So really looking forward to that. Yeah, it is our centenary. On the 15th of October this year, we began our 100th year of life, which is very exciting. So this is the first talk of our 100th year. We've had many, many talks over the last 99 years. This is the first of our 100th, so looking forward to that. We will start our celebrations properly in 2024, but as many of you know, we have already started doing that as well. And that's the wee logo that we'll be using over the next year. We do have plans in progress for our main event, which will be on the 15th of October next year, which will be our 100th birthday itself. And we'll have other events throughout the year, which we will announce at some point. But in true Hobbit fashion, we're actually going to give away birthday presents. We don't want to receive them, we want to give them away. And we've already started doing that. So Radim with the Global Meteor Network is running an outreach program, which is getting meteor cameras into high schools around the world, and Radim secured one of those cameras for a school in Scotland, and that's gone to People's High School. And with the help of the bequest that John Murrell, the late John Murrell, left us, one of our members, we will be giving away 3 other meteor cameras as part of that project. We've already allocated one of them, and we have 2 remaining. So John was a big fan of pro-am collaboration, and very keen that we would use some of this money to help with that. So yeah, 2 more meteor cameras for high school. So if you know anyone, anyone in the science department in the high school who you think would like to take part in this project, then let me know. I'll read him. The big project for us is we've set up, or we are in the process of setting up our remote observatory in Spain, ASARO, as we call it, our ASC Remote Observatory, and that's at the Travinca Skies hosting site in Spain. We're not quite there yet. That's what the telescope will look like when finished. We're currently only using the wide field scope. We had to take the large scope off because it's too large to fit under the roof of the observatory at the moment. We are moving into a new observatory building that is currently under construction, which should be in place in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll have our full kit up and running. But already our members are producing some amazing images with just the wide field scope. And you can see that on a Flickr group. We are running various projects already using these telescopes. And these were funded by the ASE Trust, which is some money that was left to us in 1937 by the Lorimer, John Henry Lorimer, one of our members then. And Bill Bonner and his company Dalrada have partly funded it. And as I said, John Murrell as well left us some money as well, and that's going towards one of those telescopes too. So we're very fortunate, and already it is producing some fabulous images. We capture the data, and various members process them in their own ways and come up with some amazing pictures. One of our other AC 100 projects, which has been going on for a while, is a history of our society. And Randall Stevenson, who's on at the moment, who's one of our members and also a emeritus professor of English literature at Edinburgh, has written that for us using a lot of information collated by Horst Meyerjeks over the years as well. And that is currently on our members site. It will probably go live on the main site at some point, and it is a really, really excellent piece of work. It's a very readable story, and it isn't just facts, so you can actually read it and hear about the highs and lows of the last 100 years of the society. And it is a living document because we are still alive and moving forward as well. So we will keep adding to that as well. But have a look at it. It is really rather nice. And I thought, since we are now in the 100th year, I would read you out the first couple of paragraphs from this history that Randall's written. It is in 4 parts, and this is the start of the coming of age, early days to 1945 section. At a meeting in October 1933, the President, J.C. Johnston, noted with pleasure, even some relief, that the Edinburgh Astronomical Association, as we were originally known, had survived into a 10th season of activities. Only a few years afterwards, as we'll see, he might have been still more cheerful, able to point to outstanding recent successes and a much more secure financial position. Nevertheless, there was good reason to look back with satisfaction on the first years of the association, later renamed the Astronomical Society of Edinburgh. Established in 1924, it had drawn on the success of a series of lectures delivered to the WEA, the Workers' Educational Association, which had been offering free adult education in Edinburgh since 1912. The lecturer was R.A. Sampson, Professor of Astronomy at the University of Edinburgh and Astronomer Royal for Scotland from 1910 to 1937. In the years following the Great War, he was a world authority on stellar temperatures and on astronomical chronometry. A crater on the moon was later named in his honour. Following his lecture series, a small committee developed plans for an association which could continue involving the public in astronomy, and the first meeting was held on 15th of October 1924 in the Royal Society of Arts Hall in George Street. And so we were born. I don't think we could have our 100th meeting in that hall because it doesn't exist as a hall anymore, but we'll find somewhere nice to do that. So huge thanks to Randall for putting that together, but we'll hopefully read out some more snippets from our history over the next year as well, because there's lots of interesting little bits and pieces in there. And talking about financial stability, your renewals were due on the 1st of October, and if you haven't done it yet, we'd be grateful if you could do that, please, in the usual ways. And we have 2 new members, Alan and Dennis, joined us over the last week. So can we welcome them in the usual way, please? Yeah. And we are up at 192 now, and I think that is probably the highest in our 99-year history. We've never come close to that, I don't think, apart from last year, we were quite close. There's lots of ways of staying in touch with us through our website, Facebook, Twitter, or X for now. Who knows how long we'll stay on that, though. All our videos of meetings are on our YouTube channel. We've got some amazing ones over the last several years, so have a look at some of those. We have 2 Flickr groups now, one for members using their own kit and one for our Azero images, and we are also on Instagram and Blue Sky as well. So everything that we're doing, you'll find on our website, though. That's probably the best place to look. Coming soon, we have lots of talks lined up over the next year, but these are for the next couple of months. On the 3rd of November, we have a hybrid meeting. That's a meeting at the Augustine United Church in Edinburgh. It will be on Zoom for ASC members and on YouTube for visitors, and that's about supermassive black holes by Dr. Hernandez Santisteban from St. Andrews University, I think. And the 8th of November, for ASC members, we have our monthly imaging and observing group, and that's a great place for us all to learn together. And we cover some amazing information there during that time. On the 17th of November, an online-only talk, A Traveller's Guide to the Stars, The Possibilities of Interstellar Exploration by Les Johnson, and that will be on Zoom for members and YouTube for visitors. 1st of December, The Search for Life by Someone Who's Done It, and that's by Richard Shaw. And on the 15th of December, The Science of Palomar Observatory, 1936 to the present, by Stephen Flanders. A note for people who do follow us on Eventbrite. Eventbrite have suddenly put up their fees or added fees for free talks as well, so we won't be actually using them anymore because we don't get anything for value there. So we will be posting a lot more of our stuff on the websites and Facebook and Twitter and Blue Sky and so on. Visitors are always going to be welcome, so keep an eye on our other channels, but it won't be on Eventbrite for too much longer. Okay, that's enough for me. I'll stop sharing and it's over to you, Mary. I think a lot of people probably already know Mary from she's a great astronomy communicator and writes for various publications that you've probably read already, but I'll leave it to you, Mary, just now.
Hi, thank you. So yeah, I hope you're all safe and well. Obviously the weather is vile at the moment, so just get my slides ready. I'm going to start off by saying, first of all, that I'm so grateful that when I was growing up, I never once heard the words, "you can't do that because you're a girl." And I'm so eternally grateful to my family for that. And they were kind of supportive of whatever, either hobby wise or professional wise, that I wanted to do. And it really wasn't until I got to high school that I found out that not everyone actually had that experience. I am not a historian. I'm going to get that straight away, but I was asked about 5 years ago to write one article for the Yearbook of Astronomy about the history of women in astronomy. And I thought I knew a bit about this subject, but when I dug into it, I found so many women that go back way further than I anticipated. And it ended up becoming a 3-part article, and the latest one is the 2024 edition is part 3 of that. I've had to split my talk now into 2 parts because there are so many people that I want to talk about, and there will be people that you're familiar with, but there may be some names and some work that you were not familiar with. So hopefully you will learn something about those people tonight. I also want to say that I'm telling some stories here, and some of the things that have happened to these women historically is kind of makes my blood boil at times. But I'm not coming at this from a feminism angle. I'm coming at this from that want for having equality, and I don't believe we're there yet. So we can have a discussion about that afterwards. But if we kind of look back through history, not very far, you will see sexism everywhere. So here's an advert with the shock that a woman can open the ketchup bottle. We've got a female astronaut here. That looks promising until you read the small print. Women of the future will make the moon a cleaner place for men to live. What a wasted opportunity that was. This is great. My first boyfriend had a Ford Capri and I loved it. But Ford literally had this advert saying, "Your Capri is precious. Don't confine it to an early grave by letting a woman drive it." If any of you ever were driving in the 80s and tried to drive one of these, they're hard to keep in a straight line. They were just absolutely horrendous cars, especially in the rain. Rear wheel drive with that long bonnet, but that was the case whether you was a male or female driver. And as a child, if you are exposed to this kind of sexism constantly from all angles, it gets into your head and you start to get that kind of gender divide that I really think shouldn't be there for quite a lot of our lives. Battleship was one of my favorite games as a kid. My brother wasn't so keen, but I used to make him play it anyway. MB on this Battleship box, we've got MB there, key to fun, ages 8 to adult. Fine, it's going to be the boy and his dad playing battleships, obviously. But if you look in the corner, we've got mum and daughter doing the washing up and looking delighted about the fact that they're doing the washing up. And it's kind of like, really? Is there so much fun to be had in the washing up? I'm not sure I'm on board with that. A lot of books throughout history that are about space and astronomy were labeled as a boys' book. And this is really frustrating. I would have read it just to prove a point, but there are a lot of children that really feel that they need to conform within these 2 brackets, and seeing something that is labeled for boys or for girls will put children off using it if they're in the wrong category. And again, just getting this thrown at you your whole life, from advertising, from books, from toys, and even clothes, like boys' pajamas because they've got planets on. Why is that a boys' pajama? When you're age 2 to 7, children are the same shape. There is no reason at all for things like this to be labeled for boys. Now, there has been a lot of work done with the Let Toys Be Toys campaign to try to take away that stereotyping. That I'll talk more about that at the end of part 2, but there have been a lot of improvements made, but there are still some outlets like Amazon that will label anything remotely to do with space or astronomy as a boys thing. And it really annoys me when I see that. So obviously, throughout history, there have been some great quotes from people. So this one from Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, "Women do not possess sufficient precision and attention to succeed at science." I think I'll prove that that is incorrect by the women I'm going to talk about tonight. Also, there's this book called Decorum, which is a treatise on etiquette and dress, and that basically tells men they must refrain from talking about subjects like politics, scientific or commercial topics. There are many women that could have held their own in a scientific conversation back then. In the 1800s, women were forbidden from using libraries because men feared that they would be corrupted by shocking stories and filthy words. And it's like, we can take it, it's fine. So yeah, women were not allowed in libraries, and they were also not allowed to actually go to university to get an education. Cheltenham Ladies College was teaching some physics and astronomy, but it wasn't until Bedford College and some of the colleges at Oxford Uni where finally women could go to university, but they couldn't actually graduate until the 1920s. And Cambridge University didn't allow women in to take a full degree until 1948. Some Oxford colleges, Queen's College being one of them, didn't allow women entry until 1979. That's 4 years after the Sex Discrimination Act was passed. And the fact that when I was like 8 years old, if I'd have wanted to go to that college, I couldn't have done because I'm female. That just doesn't compute in my brain. And I know I'm older than my brain thinks I am, but it's still quite shocking to me. So in order to get an education of any kind, a lot of girls, when it came to science and astronomy, needed to be educated by male mentors. And that's the angle that my Yearbook of Astronomy articles took. It's looking at the women who did have a really good male mentor in the form of a dad, an uncle, family friend, somebody that was willing to give the time to help the ladies get the education they wanted. So you think things had improved. And then in April 2022, Catherine Birbalsingh, who's the chair of the government Social Mobility Commission, literally said girls don't study physics because they don't like hard maths. And it's just like, it's 2022. Why are you still saying this? It's just not correct. And I think every single society in the country just immediately took to social media to refute that claim. And throughout history, obviously, astronomy has been male dominated and science in general has been. So when it came to naming the lunar craters, only 1.8% were named after women. The balance was addressed a little bit by naming all craters on Venus after women, but we can't see those. So any women that I talk about tonight that have a lunar crater, I'm going to show you where it is so that you can go and have a look for it. Back in 1977, Harvard realized that overwhelmingly 4-to-1 ratio men were being accepted over women. So they introduced a sex-blind application process, and immediately it became 50-50. So that is evidence that there is unconscious bias. Sometimes it is conscious, sometimes people genuinely think women don't deserve to study there, but there is also a bit of an unconscious bias going on. And that was actually noticed as well. The university that basically deals with time on Hubble Space Telescope, they noticed that over a 12-year cycle, it had been overwhelmingly male favored. And so they introduced a full blind application process. So it hid the university, the group leader, the name, all of it was blind, and immediately it became 50-50. And you can kind of understand it to a degree because this is a very valuable commodity. You know that Professor so-and-so did a really good job on there, so you're going to favour his application above a new person you've never heard of. So it's going with what you know. And because it's been male dominated, what you know is overwhelmingly male. So the fact that it became 50-50 straight away when they introduced this just shows that that unconscious bias is still happening. So things are improving, but we're not there yet. Now, many people will say that Caroline Herschel was the first female astronomer. She was not. A lot of people say she was the first woman to be paid to do science. She was not. But Caroline is my favorite person from history, and I am going to talk about Caroline at the end. But I'm going to talk about some women that came well before Caroline, first of all. First of all, if we go back to ancient Sumerian times, calendar keeping was really important. Obviously, we're pre-telescope here. We're talking like 2000 years BC. But the position of astronomical bodies was important in a lot of religions, and calendar keeping so that people knew where these bodies were going to be on what date was a really important part of being an astrologer, as they were then. It was astronomy. It was before the disciplines split off. And this is basically an example of a planisphere. Now, I can't read ancient Sumerian, but this is in the British Museum, and this is the kind of thing that astronomers were producing in order to basically tell people where the bodies would be. And it was all done on these cuneiform clay tablets, and a lot of these still survive, so we actually know quite a lot about this culture. One lady that was doing this is Enhedu Anna, and she's thought to have been around in about 2300 BC. So she was a Sumerian who was a chief astronomer and a priestess, and she wasn't just somebody that was doing a bit of astronomy. She actually ran the whole temple complex of her city, which is a really amazing achievement, especially when you think, like, even in the modern day, people associated with religion, women are overwhelmingly suppressed in their roles still. So that is a really important job that she had. And one of the things that she would have done undoubtedly is doing this calendar keeping. Calendar producing was the bread and butter of all early astronomers. So we know that she was working quite extensively within those parts at that time. So that's an amazing lady to go and try and read more about if you hadn't heard of her. The first lady that is thought to be the first astronomer in the Western world, we will never actually know who the first one was, because there are loads of women that would have been doing this whose names have either been destroyed in documents in a fire or just were not recorded. But if these women are doing it, others would have been doing it as well. But this is Agonice of Thessaly. So she is thought to have been the first astronomer in the Western world. And one of the things that she was really well known for was predicting lunar eclipses. She had a really good knowledge of Saros cycles, which is a knowledge that the Babylonians already had. We have good records of that. So the Saros cycle is this thing where you have a certain number of lunar months exactly between different eclipse Saroses. So there are lots of different cycles that are running concurrently with each other, but Agonice had a really good knowledge of this and was able to predict exactly when a lunar eclipse was going to happen. The problem with that is that lunar eclipses were seen as a terrible omen and met with distrust and fear, and people wrote that rather than her being really smart and good at maths, that she was in some way commanding this to happen. And it was written in literature as the moon obeys Agonice. So they're accusing her of causing the moon to do this thing that everybody is terrified of. So that's kind of dodgy. And then when she had a school for female astronomers, they were known as the Witches of Thessaly. Now, we can kind of giggle about witches and Halloween and stuff now, but there are many times throughout history in different parts of the world where being called a witch would get you killed. So this is not funny. This is actually quite scary for the women involved. As somebody from Lancashire, I'm very aware of the Pendle witches and the horrendous things that happened to any female that happened to be a bit different or had knowledge. It was never, oh, she's really smart. It was always she's commanding magic and a witch in some way. So yeah, it's kind of annoying that they were known as that, but she was a really smart lady who had very good mathematical skills and was able to do those calculations. A bit kind of more modern, when we get to about 350 AD, we have Hypatia of Alexandria. I'm whizzing through these people, by the way, because I want to talk about as many people as possible. So these are names for you to go and look up more about if you're interested. Now, Hypatia was an amazing mathematician, and she was from Egypt, and she was kind of building astrolabes and hydrometers. Astrolabes were in use for years by this point, but she was building them, using them. And she had a lot of influence. She was kind of rubbing shoulders with people that were in really high office politically. Her dad was actually the head of the school, and she taught philosophy and astronomy at that school, as well as other subjects. And people that came to her to learn were people that were aristocrats in very high office. Now, she was tolerant of pagans, Christians alike. She was well respected by everybody. So it ended up being a bit of a shock when she was murdered. And what had happened is that the guy Orestes was the Roman prefect of Alexandria. There was this huge feud going on with the new bishop Cyril, and I think most people were suspicious of Cyril, and she was giving counsel to Orestes, and this got her into trouble. People were saying that she basically was interfering and was stopping the peace process from happening. And it ended up being she just basically had all these rumors spread that she was doing this, and a mob of angry Christians hunted her down and murdered her by repeatedly whipping her with oyster shells. An absolutely horrific way to die. But in literature, there's a quote here that's too long to put on a slide, but the 7th century Egyptian Coptic bishop of Niku basically said, and in those days there appeared in Alexandria a female philosopher, a pagan named Hypatia. She was devoted at all times to magic, astrolabes and instruments of music, and beguiled many people through her satanic wiles. And the governor of the city honored her exceedingly, for she had beguiled him through magic, and he ceased attending church as was her custom. And he not only did this, but drew many believers to her, and himself received unbelievers at his house. So yet again, we have a really smart lady that's accused of bewitching people, casting spells on them, and just basically using magic because she happened to have a different opinion about religion than they did. And that was used as an excuse for her death. And it was just so brutal. There have been movies made about this. I haven't watched them. I imagine it would be quite harrowing to see that scene. What I find really interesting about this is the legend of St. Katharina, who is a Christian martyr. The life of St. Katharina is thought to be based on the life of Hypatia. And I find that quite weird when the Christians are the people that murdered her. But what's really cool about this is, like you saw at the beginning, many women don't get lunar craters named after them. Both Hypatia and St. Katharina had craters named after them, and they're pretty decent ones as well. So if we look at the Theophilus trio here, the top over here, we've got this V-shaped one that is Hypatia. The bottom one of this trio, and the Theophilus trio, was actually Katharina. I love that the mythical figure got the bigger crater rather than the smaller one. But ultimately, Hypatia has 2 craters named after her, and that is really awesome. I don't know of any other female that kind of can say that. And both of them are quite clearly visible as well. So that's really good. So when we've got a thick crescent moon and the Theophilus trio are visible, kind of easy to spot those 2 craters. So definitely look out for those. Now, Hypatia was actually working in the Middle Ages, and the Middle Ages was actually a really dark period for science. We had the burning of the Library of Alexandria, and actually I think people tried to link Hypatia with the burning of the Library of Alexandria, but I believe that the burning of the library happened before Hypatia's time. But basically anything that was seen heretical was destroyed, and amongst that, so much scientific knowledge and records, and that was a really huge loss to the scientific community. There was also a cultural shift, and women were excluded from social and cultural life. And this is something that I think we still haven't fully recovered from. Women are still expected to behave in a different way than men. We see it in the music industry. We see it in the film industry, all over. Women, if they behave the same way as a guy, for the guy, it's like, yeah, he's such a lad. For the lady, not seen so kindly. And the way that women are spoken to and kind of attacked online for various things just is proof that this is still the case. But we did still have women involved in science during the Dark Ages, and this is an illuminated initial from Euclid's Elements, where we have a lady teaching geometry using set squares and calipers and stuff to a group of monks. So we know that women must have been involved in teaching. And some of them were scribes and teachers in monasteries and convents. Now, Hypatia's death turned into a religion versus science thing, and she ended up becoming a poster child for feminism and for philosophy. But actually, a lot of astronomy and science teaching was done in monasteries and convents, and the Jesuit priests were responsible for sharing so much knowledge. And obviously, we hear a lot about what happened with Galileo, and some of that story is because Galileo just wouldn't do as he was told and had a big opinion of himself. So while, yes, there certainly is a bit of a religion versus science thing, I think throughout history, people have unfairly tarred all religious groups with that brush when they've been responsible for a lot of teaching. Now, one lady that many of you will have heard of, especially if you like classical music, is Hildegard von Bingen. She was born in 1098, and honestly, the word polymath was invented for this lady. She was phenomenal. So she was a Benedictine abbess. She was a writer, a composer, a philosopher, pretty much single-handedly founded natural sciences in Germany. She was just incredible. She was so good at so many things, and her music is stunning. My younger stepson has actually performed Hildegard's music in concert, and it is just beautiful. So she wrote books on physics, as well as writing poetry and composing music. But as well as that, she wrote some books on visionary theology. She used to receive these visions, and that's what's going on in this awesome illumination from the Liber Scivias. This thing over her forehead, that's her receiving a vision. She's dictating that to a scribe, and in true medieval art fashion, the scribe's head looks like it's coming off. He's got very strange feet. I just love medieval art so much. So that is her receiving these visions. And I've always been curious about this. Somebody who is so learned, what was the source of these visions? Now, I get auras when I'm going to have migraines, and I often wondered if that's what was going on. And actually, I've learned about this from a brewing book, of all things. My husband subscribed to a craft beer box during the pandemic, and in the Ferment magazine, there was an article about Hildegard, and it turns out she's responsible for first putting hops in beer. So if you like hoppy flavored beers, you've got Hildegard to thank for that. And it said in this article that she was known to suffer from migraines, and the auras were probably to do with the migraines. So I found it really interesting that I've kind of found that she definitely did suffer with migraines from such an unlikely source. Whether the migraines were anything to do with the hops in beer, I doubt, but you know, she was an amazing lady all the same. And you know, really, honestly, polymath was invented for her. She was so incredible. Another lady I'd quite like to meet, actually. Now, Fatima of Madrid, I'm including her, even though we don't actually know if she existed. If she did exist, she was an incredible lady, so I don't want to exclude her. But what's interesting about her is there's a lot written about the things that she did and the books that she wrote. But the earliest known mention of her at all in any literature was in 1924. So it's kind of a bit unclear, really, whether she did or didn't exist. And I've read quite a lot of arguments for and against, and I just don't know, quite honestly. Her dad was Maslama, and he was definitely a person. He was definitely an incredible astronomer who published books on astronomy. And she lived in Angiolese with her dad, and they apparently worked together. Some people credited her with inventing the astrolabe, and the astrolabe was invented years before. And by the way, this is an amazing picture of the Islamic astrolabes are exquisite. And if any of you ever visit Oxford, go to the Museum of the History of Science, because they have an incredible collection of astrolabes. They are all utterly stunning. So definitely do seek that out. And now, she is said to have written works called The Corrections of Fatima, where she was looking at planetary orbit tables and calculated orbits and correcting any mistakes that she found. But no copy of this has ever been found. She's also co-authored a treatise on the astrolabe. I believe her dad may have co-wrote this with her. There is apparently a copy of this preserved in a monastery. I haven't seen any pictures of it, but apparently it does exist. So she was absolutely amazing. If she did exist, she did a lot of amazing work and wrote a lot of really good books. But the jury is out. Like, academics seem to be just split down the middle over whether she did or didn't exist. But I wanted to mention her because if she didn't exist, it would be unfair for me not to. But yeah, in the questions at the end, if any of you know anything more about her, please do let me know. Now, during the Renaissance, more women were kind of getting into music and poetry, and that was kind of seen as okay. Music and poetry, the men were okay with women being into that, but women were also starting to get interested in politics and science, and that wasn't seen as a ladylike subject at all, but women were doing it all the same, just as I would have done. And during the scientific revolution that we had in 16th and 17th centuries, there was a huge influx of women into science. But as I said in the introduction, women were still forbidden entry into universities. They were not even allowed in university libraries, let alone actually studying in a university. So it fell to their male relatives and friends to educate them. And that is how many women were educated. Now, all of you on this call are going to have heard of Tycho Brahe, the Danish astronomer, the last great naked eye astronomer. He was working just pre-telescope being invented, and he was coming up with new and improved ways of really accurately measuring the positions of stars to an accuracy that just hadn't been seen before. But you never see any mention of his sister Sophia, who was working with him. So she was the youngest sister of the family, and Tycho had already grown up and left home by this point. But whenever they got together, she was really interested in the work that he was doing. And by the time she was 10 years old, she was helping him in his observatory. And as was common, even in the 1900s, when a lady became engaged or married, they were no longer allowed to work. I'm saying work here, they were probably doing it all for free, but they were still not allowed to hold any kind of official employment once married, which I still find just extraordinary. But when she got married, she had to stop working with Tycho. But when her husband died, she did go back and start working with him again. Now, what I find interesting is obviously her parents were not going to be in favor of her doing astronomy because it wasn't a ladylike subject, but they actually felt it was inappropriate for their son to be doing. They were a noble family. They were wealthy, noble family, and they just didn't see that this was a good use of his time. But I'm so glad that he did it anyway, because he was absolutely brilliant. It's actually said that she assisted Tycho with observations of supernova 1592 in Cassiopeia, but she was actually the person that did most of the work on this new foundation for planetary positions, using the equipment to accurately measure their positions. And you hardly ever see her credited with that. But when I was digging into this, I found that she actually did quite a lot of work. Now, because they're a noble family, they could afford a portrait painter who created this beautiful portrait. He's very good at painting people, not quite so good at painting dogs. This dog's head is so bizarre. I just find that painting really strange. But yeah, so Sophia Brahe definitely was working with her brother, hardly ever gets any credit. Now, Maria Kunitz was born, we think, in 1607 or thereabouts in Poland. She was taught a lot of subjects by her father, but when her father existed his own astronomy knowledge, they enlisted an amateur astronomer called Elias van Loen, and he started to teach her astronomy, and they ended up getting married in 1630. Today, if you mentor a young lady and then end up marrying them, it would be frowned upon. But I always look at this from the perspective of this is a kind of a meeting of minds, because women were expected to shut up and be in the corner and not have any kind of education. So we have a lady here that's really smart, great mathematician, wanting to learn about astronomy, and a guy that wants to teach her astronomy. They're going to meet and just have so much in common. So they did end up getting married, and actually it happened fairly frequently throughout history that did happen. Now, the telescope had only just been invented at this point, and it was extremely expensive and certainly out of the realm. Even through the Victorian era, actually, telescopes were really expensive. It could only be afforded by wealthy people. But although she was hindered by the lack of any sort of equipment because she couldn't afford it, she instead applied her math skills. She was really, really good at maths. And one of the things that she did was publishing corrections to Kepler's work. So obviously Kepler's laws still hold true today. And Maria Kunitz found some things that needed correcting and actually published that. And you hardly ever see her credited for that. So that was actually published in 1650. I really love this memorial for her that is in Poland, this bronze statue. Somebody told me she's wearing the wrong kind of dress for the period that she was living. I don't care. I think it's a beautiful memorial to her, and I hope one day to visit that in person. This quote is hilarious. So all the way through history, even into like the time where we had the lady computers working at Harvard and in Greenwich, women were not expected to observe at night because women were not supposed to be exposed to the night air. We were too delicate of a constitution to deal with that. So it was just not expected that women would observe at night. But these amateur astronomers obviously were observing at night, and the men of the area could not cope with this at all. So Johann Caspar Alberti said that she was so deeply engaged in astronomical speculation that she neglected her household. The daylight hours she spent for the most part in bed because she tired herself out from watching the stars at night. Yeah, I feel her. If I've been up all night observing, I don't get up at 7 o'clock to do the housework either. A girl's got to sleep. But men just couldn't cope with the fact that she was doing this. But also there was this kind of undercurrent of she stayed in bed all day, about which all manner of weird stories have been told. And there was basically this undercurrent of the fact if she's in bed during the day, that probably means that she's in some way a sex worker, and that had been an undercurrent of quite a lot of stuff that was written about her. But it's like, guys, she just needs some sleep during the day if she's been up at night. But yeah, an amazing lady, and imagine what she could have achieved if she had had access to a telescope. But yeah, quite an awesome lady. So next we get to Elisabetha Köppen-Hevelius. She was born in 1647, and she, like all of these women, loved astronomy from a very young age. And in her town was this guy called Johann Hevelius. Hevelius had been through law school, so straight away, lawyer, good money, but his family also had a brewing business. And if you wanted to get rich in the 1600s, you brewed beer. Beer was cleaner than water. It's not like Stella. This was weak beer, but it was sterilized and probably safer to drink than a lot of water at that time. So if you wanted to get rich, you brewed. And so his family were very, very wealthy, and he was able to build himself a private observatory. And ever since she was a young girl, she kept going to him and saying, please let me come and learn, please let me come and look through the telescopes. And he repeatedly sent her away. And eventually I did promise to show her the wonders of the heavens when she was older. And eventually when she was 15, he would let her come and start learning. And they got married when she was 16, obviously with a fairly large age gap. But what I love is the very first time that she actually got to go in, all these years of pestering him, she just wanted to look through the telescope so much. The very first time she went and looked through that telescope, she looked at the full moon. And this quote resonates so much with me. And when in the starlit night, she followed with enraptured gaze and beating heart through his giant telescope, the shining full moon, she exclaimed with enthusiasm, to remain and gaze here always, to explore and proclaim with you the wonders of the heavens. That would make me perfectly happy. And apparently he said it'd make him happy too, and they got married. The reason this resonates with me is that when I'd been looking at the sky just with my naked eye since I was like 4 years old, on my 11th birthday, I got my first telescope, and pretty much the only thing I ever saw through it was the moon, because I had no idea what I was doing. But that very first night, there was a gibbous moon that had just risen on my birthday, and I took the telescope out and actually saw it. And I will never forget that moment. It was really special. I wish I'd known how to use that telescope better. I think I projected the sun onto some card with it. Other than that, that was it. I just didn't know what to do with it. But this quote is amazing. Like, she's finally getting to learn with him. And he ended up dying, obviously, when she was still quite young, but they worked together for a long time. And she ended up pulling all of his papers together for publication. And the publications are all in his name, but clearly she did quite a lot of the work. So amazing husband-wife team. They did some awesome work. Now, Maria Marguerite Winkelmann-Kirsch is a bit of a mystery because we don't know what she looked like. For a long time, the whole of the internet had this photograph, if ever you Googled Maria Winkelmann-Kirsch. This is not Maria Kirsch, this is Angelika Kaufmann. She is a Swiss neoclassical painter, one of very few female portrait painters at the time. So she's another amazing lady in a male-dominated field. And this is a self-portrait that she painted of herself. So it was a lady from the BAA that actually told me that this was not her, because I thought it was. I believed the internet, never ever believed Wikipedia. After this picture was taken down, this one appeared in its place. And obviously it can't be her because she was born in 1670, and this is clearly an old photograph. That's now been removed as well. And Janice from the BAA has actually been contacting where Maria worked to try to find if there's any record of a photograph of her, but we're just not getting anywhere. So we have no idea what she looked like. She did exist, and she worked at the Berlin Academy of Sciences with her husband. So that's the picture that we've got for her. So she was born in 1670 in Germany, and her dad and uncle were big advocates in education for women. So they taught her a lot of subjects. Once they'd exhausted their kind of knowledge base, they enlisted amateur astronomer Christopher Arnold, and she became an apprentice of Christopher Arnold and learning more about astronomy. At the time, the Brian Cox of the time was Gottfried Kirsch, and through Christopher Arnold, Maria met Gottfried, and they ended up getting married. He was working at the Berlin Academy of Sciences, and she was working with him. And they got married in 1692. She became his assistant, probably for free. Most people were not getting paid still at this point. In 1702, she became the first female to discover a comet. Obviously, in 1702, women were not allowed to log discoveries. That was an outrageous suggestion. So it had to be logged in her husband's name. But a couple of years later, he did correct it and say that his wife had discovered this comet. So we quite often see people credited as being the first comet discoverer that was female, and it was Maria that was the first. Now, she worked alongside her husband for many years, was well respected by everybody in the laboratory and in the observatory. But when her husband died in 1710, the Academy kicked her out. They refused to let her stay working there because they said it would set a bad example. And it's like, bad example doing what? She's been working there, proving that she's capable of the work. She begged them to let her son be employed at the observatory so she could be her son's assistant. They were not having it. And in the end, she ended up having to leave, and she did get work in some private observatories, but the sexism she encountered was so bad she had to give up astronomy entirely, which is such a waste. She fought to get her daughters into that academy as well. They were not allowed. Her sons were eventually allowed to study there, but her daughters not. So the sexism was still really strong there, and it's such a waste of her talent. She was obviously very good at what she did, and I find it infuriating that she was kicked out just because her husband had died. So yeah, that story really annoys me. I shouldn't get so passionate about this, but it really bugs me. Now, a nicer story that doesn't bug me so much is one of Maria Clara Eimart. And I have to confess, I hadn't actually heard of Maria Clara Eimart until I was researching for the yearbook articles. She was born in 1676. This is not Maria. This is a drawing that Maria did of St. Margaret pointing at the heavens. So if you see this in association with her online, it is not actually what she looked like, it's what she drew. So she was the daughter of a painter and an engraver. So George Christoph Eimart. And painting and engraving was another lucrative career because watch faces, clock faces, all that stuff that involved delicate engraving or painting, basically you could charge good money for it. So he was an amateur astronomer as well, and because he had a lucrative profession, was able to build a small private observatory at home. His daughter became his apprentice, not just in the astronomy but also in the painting and engraving, and she brought those two together. Now obviously people had drawn what they saw at the eyepiece forever because we had no cameras, but she took it to the next level and just absolutely nailed it when it came to doing these incredible engravings and drawings, and she became quite well known for them. So she was working in the observatory with her dad and painting and engraving and doing pastel drawings of the moon. So these are some examples of the drawings that she did. So she would do this meticulously every lunar phase and record the exquisite detail that she was seeing along the shadow terminator. And I read that her drawings were so detailed that they were able to use them to produce a topographical map of the moon. And that doesn't surprise me. I can't imagine drawing anything as accurately as this. Just absolutely gorgeous. But she didn't just draw the moon. She was drawing like this kind of board here is lots of different Saturn views through different apparitions, using observations done by other astronomers as well as her own. And I love that they're drawing this the way that Saturn actually looked, not the way they expected it to look, because at certain axial tilts, Saturn can just look downright strange, but they just drew what they saw, as you always should. But she also drew loads of different comets, and I'm really excited by this picture on the right hand side because I love atmospheric optics. And this is because it says parasaline, this means this is lunar atmospheric optics, and there are some arcs here that I have never seen around the moon, so this must have been quite some display. So we've got the 22-degree halo, an upper tangent arc, circumzenithal arc, and this is either a supralateral arc, I suspect, or maybe a 46-degree halo. Either way, you don't see that very often around the moon. So she was producing these stunning drawings on blue board, and I must get myself some blue paper because I just love the way that the pastel drawings look. Now I do astronomy drawing myself from photographs and at the eyepiece. So when we had Comet Neowise here during the pandemic, I digitally made my background blue as an honor to Maria Clara Eimart, and just shamelessly showing some of my own pastel drawings here. I just love using pastels to draw the moon, but not just the moon. I draw photographs of the moon, and this is actually from a lunar reconnaissance orbiter picture of the sunrise over the central peak of Tycho. But I also do pastel drawings of deep sky objects from photographs and at the eyepiece. And this is the cosmic cliffs picture from the James Webb. That's my pastel interpretation of part of that. So I do a lot of teaching of astronomy sketching, and I hope that people like Maria Clara Eimart would be happy about that, because we all have a phone in our pocket that's capable of taking a really good photograph these days. So a lot of people don't draw anymore, and I'm a huge believer in drawing because you look better when you actually draw something. Now, we know that Caroline Herschel was not the first lady to be paid for working in science. It's actually written she was the first woman in the world to be paid for science. That's not true. This lady, Laura Bassi-Verratti, she was born in 1711, and when she was 20 years old, she got a doctorate from the University of Bologna. And basically, in England, women couldn't even take an undergraduate degree until, well, it graduate until 1920s. And yet back in this period, people in Paris, I believe that was the University of Bologna, sorry, in Paris. So she actually, after getting her doctorate, became a salaried female lecturer, and she was the first salaried female lecturer in the world. She also was the first woman appointed as the chair for experimental physics. So while she wasn't strictly working in astronomy, the physics is a bit of a link between physics and astronomy, but clearly Caroline Herschel was not the first woman to be paid to do science if we had an actual lecturer being paid here, and just not in England, sadly. Wang Zhenyi is another lady that was working before Caroline Herschel, and her grandfather was an incredibly learned man. It's when he died, it was said that he had 76 bookcases, and Wang Zhenyi actually went and studied in her grandfather's library. She was taught a lot of subjects by her father, but she was teaching herself several languages so that she could read science. She just immersed herself in her grandfather's books to get as much knowledge into her brain as she possibly could. So she didn't have the blessing of her father, but she practically taught herself everything. She was just amazing. But one of the things that she would do is kind of make models in her garden to explain how lunar eclipses work and study the mechanics of eclipses. She also wrote a lot of books. She'd written 12 books on maths and astronomy, many of them aimed at a younger audience. So she was kind of like a children's astronomer almost. And she'd done all of this, but sadly died by the time she was age 29. So she'd achieved so much already in her short life. And it's another one of those ladies who you just wonder what they could have achieved had she had a longer life. But she's somebody that I've never heard anybody talking about. We don't actually know what she looked like. This is a portrait that was done by Ginny Wade. She was asked to produce some portraits of some women from history and science, and with not really very much to go on, she just looked at period dress from the time. But it's the beautiful illustration, so Ginny said I could show that picture. So yeah, Wang Zhenyi, I wish she'd lived longer because she was clearly another absolutely amazing lady. So we come to Caroline Herschel, my absolute favorite person. If any of you have ever read her memoirs, it is not an easy read. If you are passionately in love with Caroline Herschel, like I am, reading her memoirs is actually almost quite traumatic. She had a horrendous childhood. I can't emphasize that enough. She was the youngest female child of a large family, and she was the youngest female living at home. And when she was 10, she contracted typhus, which is said to have stunted her growth. However, it's also been written that the reason that her growth was stunted was gross neglect from her mother. And she was only ever 4'3", so she was very petite, very demure, and she had lost sight in one eye. Now, her dad was actually a big champion of hers and did educate her, but only when Mum wasn't around. Mum did not approve of this at all. Mum let Caroline go to school to learn how to read and write because her mum needed Caroline to do her letters for her. She was taught needlework so that she could help make stuff for the army and to repair things at home. Outside of that, her mother disapproved of her getting any additional education that would make her useful as a seamstress, as a governess, or basically anything that would take away their free domestic slave, because that's what she was. She was basically forced into this life of being the house domestic servant. Her dad, being a champion of Caroline's, actually said, well, you're not much of a looker and we're not a wealthy family, so no one's going to marry you, so you may as well just stay at home and do this. And it's awful. Her mother kind of ignored her extensively until like when she was age 9, trying to wait on the tables and knocking over glasses. She got whipped for it. Like, nobody has dexterity at that age, but she got whipped if she did something wrong when serving the meals. And this is all in Caroline's memoirs. And the really bad stuff Caroline destroyed before anything could be published. So I dread to think what the rest of it must have been like. Now, William was actually very fond of Caroline and Caroline fond of him. So when her dad died, William and Alexander were already working in England. They wrote home and basically said they were going to teach Caroline, come to Bath, teach her to be a musician and work with them as musicians. What actually happened is, yes, they took her out of that horrendous home situation, but instead she was the house slave for them. She was keeping purse, she was doing the domestic duties. William was so busy that he didn't have time to teach her the music, so she taught herself and ended up having a really successful career singing, which is just phenomenal. But by that time, he'd become really obsessed with astronomy. She could barely speak English when she got here. She didn't understand the currency very well. She was just scared. She would go out with money to try to buy things, and everything was expensive and it was all so stressful. But she was eternally grateful to William for getting her out of an even worse situation back in Hanover. So ultimately, when William became an astronomer, he taught Caroline to be his assistant. She was so much more than assistant. Basically, William would sit at the eyepiece for hours on end, shouting down observations that she recorded. She would plan what they were going to do the next day. She would write up the notes from the previous night and keep all this going while William was busy entertaining guests and going off and doing royal visits and all of this stuff. But as well as kind of doing all of that, she was doing her own observing, but it wasn't just practical stuff. She was kind of getting stuck in. She was grinding and polishing mirrors. She was mounting telescopes. There are a number of horrific accidents where she ended up with pretty severe injuries in the workshop. And if you've ever been to the Herschel Museum, their workshop is tiny, and they were casting speculum mirrors, which was such a dangerous undertaking. And there are marks on the floor where things have exploded and kind of scalded the flags there. It is just amazing. Like, what she was doing was amazing. And she just became such an incredible astronomer in her own right. She's portrayed sometimes as feeding William a cup of tea. Now, she did feed him at the eyepiece when he forgot to eat and drink, because William was very tunnel visioned, but she was so much more than that. That painting of her bringing him some tea really annoys me, because it doesn't really kind of encompass what Caroline was about. She co-discovered lots of Messier objects. She discovered comets. I think it was 8 comets that she discovered. And she worked extensively on reworking Flamsteed's star catalogue to get it written up rather than by constellation, by RA and DEC. And she carried on working on that for years. Now, later in life, William had died and she was absolutely grief-stricken, and she did not believe she would last the year. So she moved back to Hanover, a decision that I think she regretted, because she could no longer do any practical astronomy from where she was living. But she continued to write up their observations, to rewrite the star catalogue, and she continued working on that for 30 more years. Later in life, while she was working with William, she did get a salary from the King of Denmark. So that's why it's often said she was the first salaried astronomer. So she had her own telescopes that she was using back then to sweep looking for comets. So it was a really simple design of a telescope with the pulley on it on a rotating plinth, so that she could literally sweep the sky looking for comets. That's how she did it. So this is a drawing of her first sweeper. Then William built her a bigger one with a very similar design, with that rotating sort of frame with the telescope on a pulley going up, down, left, right. So it's a very basic old TAS setup, basically. So she did loads of studying there. And this is actually, I recreated these pages from her notebook of the very first comet that she discovered. I can't tell you what a kind of guttural response I had to copying her handwriting. It was just so weird. But this is a recreation that I made of her notebook. So later in life, she started to get all of these accolades and medals. She was one of the first women, well, the first woman to get the gold medal from the Royal Astronomical Society. She was named honorary member of the Royal Astronomical Society. The King of Prussia gave her a gold medal. Because in her later years, she wasn't doing any practical astronomy, she did not feel worthy of any of this. She just, the imposter syndrome was real. And I wish I could go back and pick her up and shake her and just say, look, just take this, you're brilliant. And she was brilliant. She changed the landscape for so many women that followed after her. She was quite brilliant. And please read her memoirs. They're not easy to read, but it just gives you a new appreciation for the work that she did. Caroline does have a crater, and if you look when Sinus Iridum has just been illuminated, follow this wrinkle ridge down. It's that tiny crater there. Doesn't have a lot of morphology, but it's a really obvious crater. And I did a sketch of it using a lunar reconnaissance photograph from above that's a bit kind of more detailed. So in later life, when Caroline, or when William died, sorry, all the obituaries were saying how amazing Caroline was. but they would praise her and then say, well, that's not normally deemed compatible with female habits. And it's like, why say that? Why do you have to say something nice and take it away again with the other hand? Just really winds me up. She was worth more than that. Caroline's memoirs are amazing. The Comet Sweeper is really interesting. And Emily Winterburn wrote this book about those 10 years where she was at her most productive astronomically. All these books are amazing, so definitely worth checking out. So there are lots of women through history. I'm obviously going to talk about more of them in part 2 in February, but a lot of these women made such sacrifices so that people like me can do what I do today. And I'm so grateful to them for that. This book was published last year, and it's amazing because it's written by female astronomers themselves in their own words. So there's no writer that has a narrative that they're trying to bend the evidence to fit. It's just really interesting. And the stories in here, there are some that make you really angry, but it's also got some really lovely stories of men that have been super supportive and helped women on their career. So it's not just like a let's bash everybody for how horrible it was. There are some lovely stories in there as well. So 16th of February is when I'm going to do part 2 of this talk, where we'll get into the Victorian period and the Harvard computers and all of that stuff. And if you want to get a sneak peek of the things I'm going to talk about in that, part 3 of my Male Mentor series is in the 2024 yearbook. So I will stop my screen share and see if anyone has questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. That was really, really good. Can we thank Mary before we move on to questions, please? Okay, Ramsey, are you? If you've got a question, can you just put a comment in the chat, and Ramsey will get to you and get you to read it. Have we got any comments, Ramsey? Questions?
One comment. Let me find it again. It was, what was her relationship with John Herschel?
So John Herschel was William's son. And Caroline was very, very close with him. She idolized him. She never got married herself and didn't have children of her own. And John Herschel was quite as brilliant as his dad and went on to achieve some amazing things, but they regularly wrote to each other. He didn't get to visit Caroline very often, but she just adored him. And he would write to her to kind of pass ideas to her, show her stuff that was being published that he'd written, and also send her little riddles. She was so smart, like even in her later life when her body was very frail, she was still as sharp as a pin. And they had this beautiful relationship where he would send her little riddles and all of that stuff. So yeah, she idolized John. She really, really idolized him. So they were very, very close.
Thank you. That question was from Dennis.
Yeah, could I just ask a supplementary?
Sure.
Mary, why did Caroline go back to Germany instead of staying in England with John?
I think she just genuinely didn't think she was going to live very long, and she just couldn't cope with being there and doing the work without William there. I think ultimately that's what it came down to. She's just so grief stricken that she felt that she was going to die, so she was going to go home to do that, which I think is really sad, because she was already kind of working independently. When William got married, she had to move out of the family home and get residences of her own, so she was kind of going back and forth to the observatory to look for notebooks and that kind of thing. I guess she just felt that she would be very isolated. I think she had to kind of had etiquette lessons, because she was somebody that very much spoke her mind, and I'm not sure that there were very many people that she felt on a level with. So I think she probably wanted to be at home with family, ultimately for that last year that she believed was all that she'd lived for.
It's interesting, but she wasn't in some ways she wasn't a shrinking violet either, because I read that she rode on horseback from Bath to London to register seeing a comet, so that she got it in her name first.
Yeah, she had to write to the Royal Society, I think it was, because she found the comet but didn't actually know what to do about logging the discovery.
I
And
see.
William was away, and she was like, I think her letter says, I found a comet and I don't know what to do with it. So I think she ended up, yeah, I mean, she would just get on horseback and ride. Like I say, she was in the workshop getting stuck in, and yeah, anyone that she felt was not kind of on an academic par with her, she would call them blockheads. And like she didn't pull her punches at all, which is why she kind of had to go to etiquette lessons. But she was mixing with some pretty influential people, and quite often the etiquette back then was that you wrote to the husband of the person, not the lady directly, but people just wrote to her all the time directly, so she was very well thought of. And but yeah, like you said, she was not a shrinking violet at all. I dread to think what her opinion would be of me, but I would still take it. I'd love to meet her, and just yeah, just incredible.
Thanks again. We've really enjoyed it here, haven't we, Heather?
Will, have you got any questions on YouTube?
No, there's unfortunately there's no questions on YouTube, but absolutely fabulous talk. We've both enjoyed it here. Marvelous. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
I was quite interested in the Hildegard von Bingen because I know her from a musical point of view, but I did not know she was an astronomer as well. So that's quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, she pretty much founded natural sciences in Germany herself. She was incredible. Another unbelievably talented lady. And yeah, thank you for putting hops in beer. She was worth way more than that. But yeah, her musical compositions are stunning, aren't they?
Yeah,
she was
yeah.
incredible.
Oh, there's clearly quite a bit of linking between beer and astronomy, which I know a few of our members will probably quite like to do as well. So.
I'm really intrigued by her visions because, like I said, somebody that is clearly so academic, interpreting visions, auras as visions. I'm really intrigued by that, and actually keep meaning to dig out some of her works on visionary theology just to have a read and see what she wrote. I'm really intrigued by that subject.
Well, thank you. Can we thank Mary again for that? It was really brilliant. Thank you.
Clap, 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 clap.
And we have a comment from Carla saying thanks. That was brilliant. Looking forward to part 2. And I think we all are looking forward to part 2 next year. So we shall see you again. That'll be great. Okay. I think that's it for this evening. Our next talk is on the 3rd of November about supermassive black holes. Quite opposite poles to this talk, but I think it's nice to have a historical talk as our first one in our 100th year as well. So that's really good. And we'll see you all there. That will be in person in Edinburgh, on Zoom for members, and on YouTube for visitors. So look forward to seeing you there.